Well, here we are again. I'm sat here with Tom of Winning Performance. We're going to go on a different subject this week, not covering one of the blogs you've already written here, Tom.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to wing it a bit. I've got a few questions for you.
I'm probably better at winging it than being structured.
I like that. So I'm going to title this, Is Strength Relevant Beyond the Gym? I'm going to give you opportunities to talk about different sports here and how it might help. So, coming at it from my perspective, I come from an athletic background. I think if you ask most people on the street about strength, I'm sure they'd think about things like powerlifting and strongman and all those sort of things, Olympic lifting. But I know it goes way beyond that. What's your thoughts?
The first thought that comes to mind is Dietmar Schmidt-Bleicher's quote, and it's come up a lot this week because it's involved in some copy that I've been writing for the website. But his quote is, strength is the mother of all qualities. I first heard Charles quote it, Charles Poliquin, as where most of my stuff comes from. But the way to think about that is strength is the base of the pyramid. Okay, so when we're looking at athletic performance or even health, and this is the way we do things at my gym in Southampton, strength is the base of the pyramid that props up the rest of the strength qualities or the rest of the health markers. So without adequate strength levels, relative strength levels, you can't necessarily do other things. You need adequate levels of, let's take an example. So you need adequate levels of strength before you can do plyometrics. I have plenty of people come in and they want to do box jumps, for instance, because they see people do it in CrossFit. They think jumping's fun, so on and so forth. But my response back is, are you strong enough to perform those movements? So if you think about plyometrics as an activity, when you leave the ground and then have to come back into contact with the ground, you have to absorb your body weight plus the rest of the force. So we have standards before. So we had a client come in and she said, can I do box jumps? And we said, yes, when you can do a body weight squat. Meaning body weight on the bar, Olympic style, squat all the way down, come all the way back up. Because then I'm under the impression, or at least I'm not concerned with the fact that her form's going to break down. She needs to be able to absorb force in the right way. There are plenty of people that go on and jump and but I'm fine. But all that's happening is you're deteriorating a joint over a longer term. It's a kinetic chain, right? So if you're not strong enough, knees buckle. And over a longer time, you can develop injuries. Yeah, that's why I'm mortified when you see certain people jump. You see it in boot camps. It's an easy option because you've got no equipment, right? When you're on jump, it's tough. But just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. Right. So strength is the base to everything we do, which is why we test people.
So just to qualify that test, you talk about a body weight squat. That would be, so for somebody like me at say 75 kilos. I should have to do a squat with 75 kilos on my back.
Yes.
As a good measure.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And then we can take it further and further and further and get a little bit more specific. So you're a hurdler, 400 metre hurdler, so you're a sprinter. So when you sprint, you're probably putting, you made a fight, but when you sprint, 400 metres is a sprint, right?
Sort of, yeah.
Kind of. When you sprint, you're putting around 9 times body weight through the ground. I mean, this is, going off track, but people are worried about their kids lifting. Okay, kids jump, run, climb, and sprint. So they're putting X% of their body weight through the joint. So if you're sprinting and it's 9 times body weight, why are you worried about your youth, your child doing squats technique with 20 kilos, 40 kilos when they only weigh 20, 40 kilos? It's completely ridiculous.
Makes sense.
But with you going back to the sprinting, you take it and yes. So for you, just as somebody walking around to do jumps, 75 kilos would be good. But for you in your sport, you have to absorb more force. So now your number's gone up, and we'd look at, you should be around double body weight squat. Which again, it doesn't just safeguard you from injury; it should help propel performance upwards.
I think the secret there is I'll drop my body weight to about 25
You could
kilos.
do that. yeah, you could definitely do that.
I've heard you tell a couple of stories which I think are hugely relevant to this discussion around strength, around people that you've trained in the past in fields such as yoga and pistol shooting.
Yeah.
Would you like to share those?
So the yoga story is, it's a balance between flexibility or mobility and strength. So if you look up, I think it's Gary Gray or Gray Cook, or it's both of them, they wrote an article, it's on T Nation, still up there, many moons ago, called the Mobility Stability Continuum. You can exchange stability for strength in this aspect. So a yoga instructor can hit all the poses, for instance, and they can do the high level ones. But it doesn't mean that they're strong. And you need a certain amount of strength to balance out the amount of flexibility they have.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had two specific cases with this, with yoga instructors. They come in complaining of pain. And what's the first thing people go to when they come in and they go, oh, my hamstrings are tight. I'm going to stretch them. Yeah, but just because sometimes your hamstrings are tight because your body's trying to save you from lengthening them.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So just because your hamstrings are tight doesn't mean you're stretching. You need to look at things from a kinetic chain point of view. And this is exactly what Dr. Peter Lundgren and I teach to our coaches on the courses. But with the yoga instructor, she had loads of mobility, but absolutely no stability, strength. So she'd lengthen muscles, but she wouldn't enhance the signaling to the muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so literally 2 weeks of back extensions, posterior chain movements, and her back pain went. Because all she was doing, she was training the signaling to the muscle, i.e. strength training, and the pain signaling's gone.
Excellent. Yeah.
With the shooter, she had... What's the example? What's the specific example with the shooter that you're thinking
I
of?
seem to remember you telling me a story about somebody with a handgun,
Mm-hmm.
and they were a handgun shooter, and what you focused on was various strengthening of the arm and the wrist and the grip.
So again, all athletic performance, it's the same thing. It's find what are the prime movers, what's involved during their sport. So if we look at the sport of shooting, a lot of it comes down from obviously grip strength, forearm strength, and then shoulder stabilizer strength to be able to keep the gun from moving left, right, up, down, whatever's happening when the gun recoils. So if you look at that, strengthening from that chain back, we got results with them.
Mm-hmm. That was a real eye-opener to me, that something that seems it's all about shooting and mind control and eyesight actually can have a strength aspect to it. So
it's a really good point to bring up. So there's different terms. You've got limit strength, I think, and strength reserve. So it's like the easiest way to think about it is how much strength does that sport really need? So if we take the shooter, and let's say one of the indicators is flat press because they hold their arm in a biochromial press, so they hold their arm in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And then because of that, we could look at maybe different shoulder stabilizer movements and figure out what ratios they need. But let's say the shooter is performing pretty well and they've got X percent, let's say they're able to bench press 50 kilos. Well, we may be able to take them to 55 kilos and you may see an increase in performance. But then you'll take them to 60, 70 kilos and there's no increase in performance.
Yeah.
Take a table tennis player, for example. They don't need huge amounts of strength.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be able to change direction. Obviously, you've got strength endurance, but there's a point at which getting stronger it doesn't benefit them. There's also a point at which, so again, this is what we do with the general population clients, and actually all athletes. There's a point at which just working on relative strength, the strength levels of 1 to 5 doesn't help. We need to look at different strength qualities. I talk about different weaknesses between strength qualities. I can watch a strongman, whether they're experienced or not, powerlifter, Olympic weightlifter, and I can watch them do a squat or whatever, and I can figure out which strength quality they're lacking in. Whether it's eccentric strength, speed strength, strength speed, whatever it is, you're able to look at it and go, that's the weak strength quality.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a point at which you don't just look to get stronger. You could look at the difference between strength qualities. And the analogy I like here is Louis Simmons of Westside Barbell. So he talks about going through the gears. And I wrote it in, I can't remember which article, but going through the gears, so you can get a car going, putting it in third gear, but you have to kind of play with the clutch and be really slow. It will get going, but it's slow.
Mm-hmm.
So third gear, he kind of equates to just your normal strength, your relative strength. But how do we work on first and second gear? What is first and second gear? So first gear is rate of force development. So it's your ballistic component, your plyometric component. He talks about the 0 to 30% strength.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've had it with a client, strong woman, a lady that we've been training for many years, and you'd watch her and every single lift was the same speed, and she couldn't go from first to second to third. Essentially she was going from neutral to third every time. It would be a slow increase in strength. So we did some jumps, we did some speed strength work, which would be second gear. Okay, so it'd be the way we do speed strength is exactly the same way Louis does the speed strength. We'd work on 40 to 60% bar weight, and then you had accommodating resistance, probably 15 to 25%, equaling whatever percentage, and the bar needs to move at a certain speed.
Mm-hmm.
And we use was it Gym Aware to kind of monitor that.
Right.
So we improved those two strength qualities without training the relative strength quality. And lo and behold, all of her 1RMs went up because she was working on the right strength quality. She got to a point where you can't do any more strength. You need to figure out the weakest link.
Mm-hmm.
And the weakest link for her in that aspect, and many different athletes, was rated force development, plyometric ability, or explosive ability, and then speed strength.
Okay, excellent. Looking a bit more specific then, again, my background, track and field, running, jumping, throwing.
Mm-hmm.
I think people get that a shot putter is strong. It's a very powerful, as well as a dynamic event. And sprinters, there's a big trend, has been for the last few years, of being looking very, very well tuned and big chested. When I took up coaching over 10 years ago, I was told by other senior endurance coaches that runners don't need weights, runners don't need strength. We
still get that, and one of my coaches, Will, he actually trains a predominant base of endurance athletes. And the selling point for me, the way I would explain it to an endurance athlete is, let's say you're doing the 10,000 meters or whatever, or a marathon. If I can get you to run 1 centimeter further per step, and then you tally that up over 10,000 meters or a marathon, you're doing less steps, you're more efficient, i.e. you're going to be quicker.
Mm-hmm.
The basic premise of speed is there's only two ways to get quicker: stride length or stride frequency. Stride frequency is pretty much set. You can't really change that too much from what I gather. And I know people argue about running economy and things like that, but I put that as down to frequency. But stride length I can definitely increase for certain people, and that's where I kind of look at it from an endurance point of view. The other side of the coin is, you'll still get this even in football today. You'll get people say, if I weight train, I'll gain muscle and then I'll be slower, which is absolutely ridiculous. You'll be quicker. It's not going to slow you down. Yeah, obviously a certain amount of muscle bulk is going to slow you down, but you give me an endurance athlete, they're not going to put on that much muscle bulk. It's the first thing that people say in a consult: I don't want to get too big. People don't get too big overnight.
No.
I've gone off into a rant now, but it just doesn't happen. You don't wake up and think, fuck, I'm massive, I'm like Ronnie Coleman. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
In anything, you normally lose a little bit of body fat and you look a little bit leaner.
Yeah.
But you don't add on 5 kilos of muscle overnight and all of a sudden think, oh, it just doesn't happen that quick. Even people that are on anabolics wouldn't gain muscle that quick. Certain people, obviously. But yeah, for an endurance athlete, for me, it's injury prevention alongside performance enhancement.
I remember the breakthrough for me, where I actually was able to start convincing people, was I read about Paula Radcliffe, who at the time was the world record holder for the marathon, and she apparently could squat 1.5 times her body weight. Now, I don't know how much she weighs, and it's probably not very much, but still that's a pretty impressive figure.
But she's going all the way down. That's very impressive.
Yes.
Very impressive. But it doesn't surprise me, because she would be what we would class as a genetic freak. You don't get to be world record holder and win that many titles without being a freak as well. But when you see examples of it, and that's the barrier. But with an athlete and they come to see me, they have nothing to lose. To literally just try it for 4 weeks, see what happens.
Yeah.
The other biggest battle you'll get, especially with endurance athletes, is when you add something in, something has to come out. Okay? As a human organism, you cannot just keep loading and loading and loading and loading. Okay? The body will break down at some point. And that's the biggest battle. But endurance athletes only need 1 session a week, maybe 2 sessions a week of weights. You could do 30 minutes of them full body. They're going to get stronger because it's all new to them. You haven't got to do anything crazy, anything sexy. You could just do 2 full body workouts for half an hour and just slowly provide progressive overload, and they'll hit it. But what you'll find is if you put 2 weight sessions in, you've got to bring at least 1 running session out.
Yeah.
And that's where you hit a barrier. Or you need to adjust recovery. It just doesn't happen because I've got to keep my runs in.
Yes.
The other side of things with endurance athletes is peaking. So deloading and unloading. So for me, the further you are away from competition, the more weights you could probably do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's say we're 12 months away. You don't need to be running 4 or 5 times a week. Okay. You could go, actually, this is a period where I could build strength, build a bit of muscle mass, hopefully maintain and carry that into the season. So as you get closer to the race, of course, weight sessions are going to become less important. You drop them off. And then your technical sessions, your running sessions become more important. So you could increase that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's a big battle trying to convince a runner to just drop 1 session.
I think one of the drawbacks with endurance runners, they have a very simplistic metric, which is mileage.
Yes.
Mileage completed in a week.
Mm.
If we could somehow give them a benefit in terms of mileage of a strength session, that might be a breakthrough. So.
Yeah, it comes back to quality and quantity.
Yeah.
They're always about quantity. If it was the person that did the most miles, it would be an easy way to train. Just go out and do the most. But it doesn't. It's not like that.
No. I still get asked how many miles I do a week, and I only have to do a quarter of a mile in a race.
So now I want you to reply with no, but I can squat this many kilos. Just reply with that. Don't know, but I do track my weights.
Okay, the US. I think have understood weights for a long time. I think it's part of their culture. It's part of their sports. If you ask any American footballer what can they bench press, they'll knock it off straight away, and everybody knows what that means. Was Charles involved in this sort of stuff with the big teams? Do you know any?
Specific teams, most likely. I mean, he did. Obviously, he was heavily involved with the Canadian winter and summer Olympic teams, so the national teams in every sport. That's why he has so many gold medals to his name, because he was running programs and monitoring and taking care of that many sports at once. But going back a step, I can definitely attest to the Americans being ahead of the game with regards to strength, because I had the good fortune of living in America from the ages 13 to 16. So left England, went to America. I was in a gym at age 14. When I went to high school, they had the gym there, and that's all they were doing. These guys were massive compared to me. I was only a football player, soccer, football. I was trying to train these American footballers because I was very eager to learn. But it was straight in. When I came back at age 16, nobody trained in the UK. So when I came back for A levels, sixth form, whatever you call it, I was getting up before school and training in the little weight room they had, but no one else was.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a huge part of the culture over there. But Charles, he was heavily involved in regards to teams. He ended up in NHL. But with regards to strength and conditioning for team sports, one of Charles's students, he has the potential, or could quite easily command a position in the NBA. Okay, he actually, I think his name is Preston Green, and I think he's at Florida University. But he prefers training the university students because he sees progression and he has a little bit of control over what they can do. Strength and conditioning, even in some of the main sports, is dependent on the head coach's attitude toward strength and conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's got a really good history of having these students go into the draft. So he transferred. They have a winning record, and then they go off and they're very successful. But then if he went into the NBA, he wouldn't be able to train any of these guys because they wouldn't want to. Mm-hmm. It's not part of the culture. You see it in football, soccer in the UK. Charles always said that soccer is 30 to 40 years behind.
Yeah,
and he's probably right. It's optional. I remember we did one of Charles's course at Fulham Football Club, and the head strength coach was there, and I was conversing with him, and he said, "No, they don't have to train if they don't want to." Look at I always bring up the difference between Wayne Rooney and Ronaldo.
Mm-hmm.
So Ronaldo is obviously very well known. They compare him with Messi, but Rooney's not in that same sentence, not in that same breath.
No.
Okay, Ronaldo had ability, plus he had the work ethic.
Absolutely.
Rooney had ability, but not the same work ethic. I'm not saying he didn't have any, but he didn't have the want to go and do weights, as much extra training. From what I gather from another strength coach who was at Man United, a guy called Clegg, Rooney would leave. He'd train and leave. Ronaldo would train, stay on. He had his own strength coach, I believe, his own chef, and he would do the extra work. So there's the difference that the strength training aspect and the work ethic can get you.
Yeah.
But in team sports, a lot of it is optional, and it's based around the head coach. In fact, I knew the strength coach at Southampton. He actually trained here when he was at uni, at my gym. So he was training here, and then he went and did internships, because that's the only way to get a job in football. You've got to work for free for a year. Mm-hmm. And then I think he got the assistant coach's job, and then that head coach left, so he was promoted. And then Pochettino came in, and Pochettino doesn't like weight training. So strength coach looks at him and goes, well, I can't really do any good here. So he went off and he went to Sweden. I think he's at Malmo now. He's doing quite well. But it's dependent, that team sports is dependent. You've got this myth that if you're at the highest level, you're in the Premier League, you're the best strength coach. Mm-hmm. I get it all the time. Oh, I see the Premier League, I see Southampton Football Club's physio. It doesn't mean they're good, just because they're in that position. But with regards to strength training and team sports, it's very much behind.
Yeah.
Rugby is in front. Rugby teams know exactly what they're doing.
I do remember when rugby went professional in about 95, I remember hearing Andy Nicol, who's the Scotland scrum half at the time, claiming that pretty much every rugby player in the UK had put on 2 stone of muscle in that year, just because I think 2 things: one, they could train full time, and one, they could recover properly. That's the
bottom line. If you've got to train. If you've got to train technically, then train with weights and hold down a job.
Yeah,
your stress levels up. You can't recover as much.
So imagine if let's take some different sports, cricket or perhaps netball. The team turned up here.
Cricket, I'd love to.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why I'd love cricket? Because not so much now, but the Hampshire job strength and conditioning coach came up. But again, it's an old boys network, so to get in, you need to know somebody to get in. But I applied, didn't get anywhere. But I'd love cricket because there's a season and an off season. Mm-hmm. With football, there's no off season. The season's extremely long.
Yeah.
So if you look at the American sports, off season, they go train, they keep fit, they break strength levels, they make muscle mass, they can come back to next season stronger. But with football, what do they get off 4 weeks a year?
No,
it's nothing.
If there's a competition.
But the sports in America are a bit more seasonal, so they're not played 100% of the year. So there is an off season. And cricket, it either used to be, but now I think they end up going to India to do the different leagues.
Yeah.
But the opportunity to take a cricketer in an off season would be, I'd love that, because depending on take a bowler for instance. So 6 balls and over. I don't know what an average over, like how many overs they would do in an innings, depending on if it's one day or a test or whatever. But the amount of times they're coming in at pace, landing on that lead leg, I'd have to look it up, but it's got to be upwards of 9 times body weight going through their force. 6 times and over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if they haven't got adequate strength to do that, they are going to break down for sure.
Their shoulder and their knee strength has to be.
I can't really comment on the quality of strength training and strength conditioning in cricket because I don't know anybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I'd love to take a cricketer or a bowler or a batsman, make them into, because they've got quite a not relaxing but low energy expenditure sport.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they stand around, but it's nice. They're not sprinting for 90 minutes.
They seem to appear fitter than a lot of the cricketers of old who are probably carrying a few pounds too much.
Remember both of
them. Individual sports like golf and tennis. I look at somebody like Nadal, who appears to have one arm colossally.
Yeah, it doesn't appear. He has one massive right arm or whatever.
Yeah. Strength training for those 2 sports. I imagine you have golfers come
we do strength training for golf. I can improve somebody's drive within 4 weeks for sure. The predictor lift for that would be chin up, supinated chin up.
Okay.
And split squats.
And we've done a whole podcast on the chin up, so
so you can go and
can just have a look at that. Yeah.
But again, taking different sports, you've got to look at how much is it a technical aspect, how much is it a strength aspect. So with regards to golf, huge technical aspect. So there's different timings, and you make somebody stronger that sends all their timings off, or can send their timing off. But I can definitely improve somebody's driving range because it's a maximal effort. So getting them stronger will definitely improve that. With regards to the other end of it, their slow game, a bit more slow isometric contraction work. So 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down tends to help their game a little bit. But putting, I don't know, I could strengthen their forearms up. There's a huge element of forearm control, radial, ulnar deviation, wrist extension, wrist flexion. So strengthening up a golfer's easy, but the biggest thing you're going to find is, because the golfing is, you're hitting the ball one way all the time. What you need to look at is a huge injury prevention element. So balance between muscle groups, hence the split squats, as opposed to just back squats.
So I suppose, really what you're saying is, if somebody comes in to your online business or into your gym, you would sit down with them and really understand their sport and understand the movement, and design a personalised program for that. Yeah,
and if you don't, the first question to ask is, where does everyone get injured in your sport? Because then if they're getting injured there, you can usually figure out, just trace back why. Yeah. Sometimes it's a case of that's a weak muscle, sometimes it's the kinetic chain, something above or below might be weak. But the first point of call is, an athlete needs injury prevention over strength gains. Yeah. Because they need to be able to do the technical aspect more often and better. So if you can keep them, so if I can keep the golfer doing technical sessions, I'm almost doing my job, and then the strength element comes up. But if somebody comes in, you look at that, look at injury history, ask them about the sport. You really have to understand the culture of the sport. So I tend to go and I tend to get a little bit more involved. I remember someone approached me for CrossFit training. I know you've got a big smile on your face. So what I did is I went away and I watched all the Netflix documentaries, so I can understand how they worked and what was needed. So you want to understand the mentality behind the athlete. But strength testing is quite easy when they come in. The first thing I look at is an overhead squat. Sometimes I'll look at certain training videos and see if I can do some testing with them. A lot of times, even very, very high level athletes, you don't do strength testing because they're weak and they can't move properly. So I fix that over the first 12 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. Then I can do some strength testing. I don't need to test their strength. You don't need to look at 1RMs if they're already weak. Train them for 8 to 12 weeks, then you can start looking at all these variables. Because essentially, if we look at the base of the pyramid, they're starting right at the bottom. Yeah. There's no previous. Sometimes you get a bit more of an experienced athlete, you can look at 1RM singles, 3-rep maxes, whatever it is you're looking at, and take that data, and then you can look at it. But I use Charles's structural balance theory. There is at least 1 to 3 predictor lifts for each sport, and we would do a testing day and or testing week. But a lot of the time, someone first comes to see me, they're usually weak. Okay.
So controversial one to come towards the end. As and speaking as an old person myself, strength training is no good for old people, isn't it?
Oh, that's what you're going to say? Yeah. Obviously, I'd argue against it. I have many clients come in, but the stronger you are, the quicker you recover from injuries. The more likely you are to avert injuries as well. So you'd be able to, like an old person, trips, falls, they'd be able to either contract muscle upon landing and safeguard something, or they'd be able to grip onto something to prevent the fall. So strength training for, what are we looking at, 70 plus? Yeah, has a huge, and they don't need to train 4 times a week, once, twice a week. My PB for age in this gym is 91 years old. She had a hip that was older than me. So she was, bless her, and she was also a bit hard of, she didn't have great sight. So it was a challenge, but again, there's a huge benefit to strength training. And again, we're not looking at singles, it's more about movement quality, activating the nervous system. Grip strength's a big one for elderly that I would look at. I put a post up today. There are studies out there that will show that grip strength is a predictor for heart disease and stroke. Okay. And I've spoken about this before with my coaches and maybe on a different podcast, but because of the amount of real estate that the grip or your hands take up in the brain with regards to nerve endings and that, it has a huge effect on the whole health of the body.
The other indicator with age I've seen is balance, and standing on one leg with your eyes shut. Yeah. I've seen youngsters be able to do it for a couple of minutes with no problem, and then as people get older that deteriorates quite dramatically. And I think it's down to what you're saying about this firing the nerves, keeping them well trained, and it's perhaps not necessarily about the weight of the weights, but the fact that you're doing it and reminding the body, and that's it. If they hit PBs, brilliant. Like we had a
60 something, 64, 65, and he was able to do a chin up with nearly his body weight. It was like, and we're not talking like a small amount. I mean, it was half his body weight. We're talking he was around 70 kilos, and he could do a chin up with 40 kilos on him, which most youths and athletes can't even do.
Mm-hmm.
We have a pegboard. When you take a peg out and you climb up, he'd go up, down, left, down the diagonal, and then all the way up and back and around. He was completely impressive, and he was getting stronger year on year. They talk about strength will decline after. No, it doesn't necessarily decline. Obviously, if you're at a high level, like me, my strength will decline as I get older for sure, because I'm not going to be in that peak. But for him, he was getting stronger year after year.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, he messaged me the other day, because he's not here anymore, but he's up wherever, and he said, "I've been singing your praises because everyone keeps asking him where he's trained, what he's done, his previous experience, because he's in a different gym, and they have these gym challenges." And he is smashing it. He's beating people, 20 years younger than him, 21-year-olds. So he's absolutely killing it, which is great for me to hear after the fact.
So age no barrier.
No. If I can train a 90-year-old, I can train anybody.
Perfect. So wrapping up, really, I think we've talked about what your gym can offer, what your private training can offer. It's a matter of just whatever sport you're involved in. Just look at the movements, look at the strength indicators, and use them, and you can offer programs to assist with that.
Yeah, for sure. There's many different systems and ways of looking at things.
Okay, and I think going back to the quote you used right at the start, the strength is the mother of all qualities. That's the mindset we should all be in, whatever sport, whatever area we're in. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Cheers, John.